What's up? What's up? How's everybody doing? This is Big Cheds coming to you on August 7th. It's a Tuesday. We are joined with our dear friend Big Chonis. How you doing, Big Chonis?
Hey, Cheds, how are you tonight? Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. Happy to be here. Happy to answer some questions and talk about some Bitcoin with you.
Yeah, I think it's. I'm glad you're here, and you're. I know you're a great resource. When you and we've done our shows on YouTube, we bring a lot of different perspectives. So I think it's awesome that we're able to do this for the folks here at Bitcoin Live. If you want to find my friend on Twitter, he is at Big Chonis. You can find me on Twitter at Big Cheds. I would just love to, good buddy, hear your thoughts, kind of what's going on, how you're feeling, just a few general observations, and then we can kind of take it from there.
Sure. Well, you got the 15-minute up there, but if we could possibly look at the daily chart just to get more of a broader view of what we're kind of looking at right now. I mean, let's be honest here. Over the past week and a half of Bitcoin, it's been nothing but red candles and deflation from our 8,500 top off we had basically at the end of July. Now, from our nut low, which happened basically earlier in July or towards the end of June there, to our nut high was basically 30 days there, so that was a cycle where we basically had a bottoming out on Bitcoin, and then we had a top off, and a lot of this was basically potentially driven by a lot of this speculation of the ETF. There was supposed to be a major event happening later on this week, so a lot of that run up in Bitcoin, basically once our inverse head and shoulders, once the neckline was broken through bullish, clearly had a lot to do with that really nice run up we had into July. And frankly, what's clearly telling by this current move we have here is that we're basically retesting that major area of support that kind of defined that whole bullish move to begin with. A lot of people that were on the bull side of this trade were looking for some support somewhere above 66 to 6700. You wanted to kind of hold that neckline there and confirm that that would be a very strong support area, and that's what a lot of the bulls in this market were hoping for, some sort of a bounce. Now we're basically right there, but in theory, because the daily candle close of yesterday's candle, we pretty much kind of violated that head and shoulders neckline, or we're just right there. It depends kind of how you want to perceive it. If you want to give kind of the benefit of the doubt, maybe that, okay, we're kind of break it, we're kind of force some sort of an oversold bounce, and that could potentially lead to our next move higher. But clearly, by the way this market reacted to the ETF news itself seems to be driving the price of Bitcoin currently, and not so much fundamentals and whatnot. And because of this really bearish move, we're
Mhm.
seeing bear crosses commence. We're seeing a lot of
Mhm.
support areas that we wanted to hold just fail.
So are you like what are you all cash now, or kind of what's your posture?
Well, again, so I've defined my last trade in Bitcoin from a basically day trade to a swing trade. So I was prepared to hold a long at around 68.50 to $6,900, for a couple days, basically wanting that area to bounce. And I plan to layer out sells up in the 7,200 and
Hmm. Hmm.
higher area.
Hmm.
Unfortunately, my plan kind of fell apart once that news hit, and clearly the market took it hard. So my stops were executed.
Hmm.
I gave some liberal movement to where I could absorb some sort of loss,
Right.
but I basically turned, I was up maybe like $150 or so per Bitcoin in that trade.
Hmm.
And because of that quick action, that quick bearish action, my
Hmm.
stops were triggered. And luckily at that moment, I was able to get out more or less where I entered from. So that prevented me from basically continuing to hold this $300 drop, $400 drop in price to where we are now. And
Hmm.
as a trader, it's very important. I mean, we've seen the volatility in Bitcoin. We've seen what can happen. We've seen what news events can drive the price action. So always, as a smart trader, it's very important to continuously use the stop loss. Even if you're very confident in your trade, it will always protect those profits and put a less of a downside on that risk side in case the trade goes south, as seemingly like what happened, today.
That's a great explanation. Appreciate that. I had a couple thoughts, but I just want to tell folks real quick what we'll do is we're going to go through and answer the questions from the post on the on Bitcoin Live. People who and we're going to answer their questions, and then I'm going to go to the chat room. We'll take your chart requests. We'll get those done. I'll just kind of wrap up with my thoughts here in Bitcoin. And thank you, Big Chonis, for sharing that. It's kind of interesting, isn't it, that that news about the Winklevoss ETF rejection? Look where it came. Look where the RSI was. Right, it came right when it was frothy. After that nice bull run, we had news of another delay today. Now, I've seen a lot of smart analysis from people, well, rather people I think who are smart, who are don't rush to judgment, who think it's actually pretty good news. They didn't reject it. It means they're looking at it more seriously. You could perhaps you come to that conclusion essentially. And so I think keeping that in mind, however, the way the market's been absorbing news, the market absorbed news at a key support area on, as you said, the inverse head and shoulders. We had our neckline break at 6,800. This is would have been a classic back test of that trend line. And pardon me, it looks like we did not hold it, or probably will not hold it, given where the news hit. Last time the news hit, look what happened. We had whatever 10 days, 8 to 10 days in a row that were down. People know now that this news came out. A lot of people are spooked. I don't think it will hold here, but I certainly could be wrong. I think it's very likely we see a test of the low sixes, and I will kind of keep an eye out for that. I mean, the RSI is not really that oversold yet. It's hard to have confidence.
Yeah, I mean, you have to acknowledge where the RSI is now, and we really wanted to hold above 50 on a daily chart on the RSI above 50. I consider that a healthy RSI, an RSI in an area that can continue to induce bullish moves. Once we broke 50, which we did, like over a week ago, that kind of set the potential of this whole bearish continuation in motion, and we see how pancaked, how flat our stochastics is. It's unprecedented how long and how flat our two indicators have basically been pegged at zero. Normally, when we do touch this area, especially on a higher time frame, as you have the daily up, we do expect some sort of a bounce. But because the RSI is still above 30, we can still go bearish and test a RSI 30, which could basically be another area of potential bounce if we're unable to hold in this area.
I think that's really great analysis. So that's where we're at on Bitcoin. Big Chonis, do you actually have access to the chat room? Maybe we should do the requests first. Can you see what people are saying in the chat?
Why don't you bring those
link.
off?
So I would have to. I'm going to click on the public link then. Let's see. Let's see how the sausage is made, as they say. Oh, you know what? I need to see it perhaps on another screen. Well, you know what? Pardon me. Okay, you still there?
I'm here, buddy.
Sorry about that. I apologize. I tried a couple things. They weren't working. I bailed out quickly. So we're going to go ahead and do what we can do right now and just kind of keep the ball rolling.
Okay.
So I'm going to start out with, we're going to go to the Bitcoin Live. We have the post. And the first question is from Abdullah. Do ZRX and ETC. So what do you say we do ZRX and ETC?
Absolutely. And
we'll just go on the ZRX daily chart. I'll just kind of give you my thoughts, and I'll allow you to give yours as well. It's still pretty bullish, but we're kind of, this whole higher low thing here is a little bit tenuous. So we have a higher low here. Here's our higher low. Nice little double bottom, but the bulls need to make a statement here. You could potentially argue for an equilibrium with the higher low, lower high, and if that's what you believe the case to be, you probably do expect a decision point, a pivot in this pattern to happen right here, which would correspond with that Bollinger Pinch. I really don't see the kind of buy volume, buy pressure I'd want to see. Big Chonis here in the daily chart. That being said, I don't see any sell pressure. There's really clearly no, like you can see in the on-balance volume, right? Bulls are not putting their foot on the neck of the bulls. So I think it's sideways. It's consolidation, and I think it's healthy. That's kind of what my view is. What's your opinion on that?
Yeah, you're on log there too. I wonder what the linear might look like in a different context.
There's linear.
Pretty
There's
much the
linear.
same.
I know, right? I know, right?
So yeah, so it's interesting. Okay, so yeah, I mean, so all right, so first we should really acknowledge how ZRX as a coin has been a very tradable coin. You know, it's definitely separated itself in terms of the alts as something that has consistent money flow and is consistently talks about. And really, the reason for that is its most latest news is potentially being added to Coinbase as they try and expand their coins there. So
Hmm.
that bullish news that happened with ZRX specifically a few weeks ago really added to some of that continued bullish momentum. Um, like the other coins that were announced at that time, you know,
Hmm.
your other ones there, ZRX has kind of done that same thing where it's consolidating, obviously, from that move and kind of in this holding pattern where you mentioned we'll discuss Ethereum Classic in a moment, where Ethereum Classic is basically a month ahead in terms of what could potentially happen with ZRX. So I think that as a tradable coin, it's definitely something that will be in play for quite a while
Hmm.
because it's exposure to the potential listing. Now, from an indicator standpoint of the chart, I agree. I think it's still being accumulated. I
Hmm.
think people are trying to basically buy the dips, if you will. The equilibrium of the price action is clearly tightening. And you
Hmm.
can see by the BPVR, we have a very tight concentration of dollar volume in a very
Hmm.
specific
Hmm.
Satoshi area there. So as long as that continues to build, that should add a very strong support base for
Hmm.
potentially moving forward as a major thing. Now, if it is listed on Coinbase, that's going to be a very impactful moment. The run up to it and the
Hmm.
actual transition onto actually being traded on that exchange. So all that will create positive news stories that will just keep this coin moving forward. Its supply as well is not that crazy compared to other ones as well. So there's clearly something happening here. Now, I agree that we're probably putting in some sort of ascending wedge because we clearly keep bashing and getting rejected right around the 20,000 Satoshi area.
Yeah.
Yet we're putting in higher lows every time we seem to have a reset. So as long as we're able to continue that pattern, putting in a higher lows, which still is somewhere around keeping it above 11,000 for like a
Hmm.
really bad drop, you can still kind of maintain that equilibrium. But a break of like 11 or at least 10,000 would put this current trend in doubt. The way it's currently moving, I would expect another test of the upper resistance zone, somewhere around 20K, to
Hmm.
basically retest that. And then any break of that would be pretty significant on the daily chart.
All right. Let's. I think I want to associate myself with the comments of my esteemed colleague on that one. Let's go to Ethereum Classic. Let's. Ooh. So I mean, the daily chart was excellent,
Yeah.
and I think I myself and pretty much anyone else who's paying attention noted this is an area of high traffic.
Mm.
Big Chonis, essentially where you've had a lot of action in the past. I mean, we have this peak here from early May. We have this peak here in late June. We broke it, kind of came under it here in the beginning of July. So as we're rising here on day 3, third white soldier, you're thinking, oh, what's going to happen? Is it going to break through here? It broke through here, but it was rejected. That's called an upthrust, where you break a resistance only to kind of come back down afterwards and has an added bearish emphasis to it.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's the same concept of what's called a spring, where you have support. Say it's tested 4 or 5 times, it breaks, but then all of a sudden it bounces and springs up. It kind of, it's like a false bear move in that sense. In this case, it's a false bull move, and clearly this candle, it's what we call a high wave candle. Yesterday, where you have very tall upper shadow and a pretty long lower shadow as well, and you have pretty much the volume dominates here. So this candle is 3 times as important as its prior candle, Big Chonis, in my view, given the volume behind it.
Mm-hmm.
I think this has to cool off, and I think we probably look to find support around 22, 23 area. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, first we have to acknowledge that just wicked shooting star on the daily candle yesterday. This one had a great run. I mean, let's say we have 1, 2, 3, 4 massive green candles there. Profit should have been taken based on that epic move We see how quickly the stochastics rode up there. We
Mm-hmm.
see our RSI was firmly rejected right at 70, a
Mm.
place where the last time it was also rejected at 70. Yeah, so these are ways that your indicators can really give you a forward clue as to where you should take profits once certain indicators, resistances are hit. Now, this is fine in terms of the overall bullishness of this play, because I
Mm-hmm.
feel we're just hitting stopping from basically a technically overbought area. I know that Coinbase has begun allowing transfers into its Coinbase wallet. If you
Mm-hmm.
currently own Ethereum
Mm.
Classic, you can start loading it up. It hasn't begun trading yet, so that's going to happen sometime probably later in the month. But again, it's going to
Mm-hmm.
contribute to just news and continuation and volume and money flow into this play. So I do
Mm-hmm.
expect this to correct just from a technical standpoint here, but I
Mm-hmm.
would expect another move higher at some point as we go on with the news and the implementation of it being traded on Coinbase.
This is screaming sell short term, because we have crossing sell stochastics pending with today's candle close, because it's a little bit of a lagging effect. Obviously, the RSI rejection. Look at this, just on balance volume. It just shows me that it's something, a little sick, right?
This
And
was clearly a planned event where if we can get the price to
that's
this
true.
level,
Yeah,
we're bailing out, and clearly that's what happened there.
News broke the chart. Let's move on. Big Chonis, question from Hunk. Oh, you asked yourself a question?
You can't say that.
Okay. The question is trading alts. How do you calculate trading alts slash BTC? So it's a BTC pair.
Mm-hmm.
How do you calculate a profit strategy? Any kind of quick thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question, because recently we've been seeing that very scenario play out, where we're seeing bullish divergence on the BTC pairings of alts, yet on their USD dollar pairing, you're actually in the red.
Mm-hmm.
So you basically are trying to load up on alts because of the indicators are oversold. You're feeling this is a good loading zone, and on the chart it seems like you're making progress. You're having green candles, but wait a minute here, my USD equivalent is dropping. Why does that happen? Well, it's dropping because Bitcoin's dropping, because all the alts are going to be valued in Bitcoin. So there's something you have to factor in here. Even though you feel you're winning on the BTC chart in terms of a price movement, if Bitcoin is dropping, or at least not holding a stable price level, you are going to see a deflation, or at least a loss in the USD. The really only way to combat that is just to basically, unfortunately, keep adding to that trade if you feel that it will turn around on the alt side of it, because if a pop in Bitcoin, see, again, here's our overall issue. We had seen the Bitcoin dominance increase to almost 50%, while the alts bled over the past basically 2 weeks. And it was very vicious there. So as the past couple of days went on, when Bitcoin was able to find some stability, you were watching to see some of those alts stabilize and find a move. But because of today's Bitcoin price action, we see how a lot of those profits and gains were given up. And what this really signalizes is that if Bitcoin continues this bearish momentum and continues to fall into the lower 6,000s, there's no safe place for the alts, even if you're finding bullish divergence in the BTC pairing of them.
What about BNB though? What about BNB? Is that a counterplay?
Okay, that's a great point, because there's been a couple kind of unicorns out there that have bucked the curve. BNB coin is clearly a special situation, because it's literally a coin created by the exchange itself, Binance. And again, we've seen some really strong bullishness after a pretty significant pullback in BNB that seemed to basically end as the end of July happened. Now, there could be some sort of a correlation here. It's possible between a deflating Bitcoin and almost a flight to safety, if you will, in the BNB. We're seeing a lot of money flow, especially right in that area, right around 20,000 Satoshi area. This is a pretty important area for this coin, because a breakthrough of this area can really set the stage for further bullish momentum, there's
Mhm.
really no saying what this coin could achieve just because it's basically a special, unique thing. I
Mhm.
think along the way, you're going to see a lot of exchanges themselves creating similar coins that are basically produced and held and created by the exchange they're actually on.
Let's take a look. That's a great analysis. Big Chonis on Twitter at Big Chonis. We have Dash is a request by Vladimir Nikolov.
Sure.
Dash. All right. I mean, it looks like a lot of these other charts, right? But actually, this one looks decent. Although today's candle, you got to ignore today's candle, right? Oh, wait, I'm looking at 4 hour. 4 hour looks decent. 4 hour kind of looks like an inverted head and shoulders or a inverted three Buddha. It's trying to form. Let me pull that up for people to see what I'm talking about. Inverted. This is inverted three Buddha or the Western head and shoulders. Head, shoulder, shoulder, potentially here, but it's still really early. It's still not even halfway through this candle, but stochastics is fine. You are seeing stabilization in the on-balance volume, but you actually have a higher low versus a flat low. I mean, yeah, it needs a little time. I'm going to quickly comment on the daily chart, and I'll pass it off to you. Yeah, looks to me going lower, kind of getting rejected here at the EMA 8, and stochastics is crossing over. The RSI kind of cooled off from being oversold enough that it can now push back lower again and probably will break the support. So I am bearish on this chart. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, Cheds. I mean, I really agree with what you're saying there. There's not much to talk about. This has been a real slow and steady kind of bleed out where we have seen the volume ever so slightly increase during this moment here. The price action does seem to be leveling out at this area. But as you pointed out, we have another bearish cross in our stochastics. Our RSI is under 50 on the daily, so that's continuing to show a bearish sense, and your OBBV is just showing continued capitulation, and we're putting in lower lows here. I mean, you're on the Binance chart there. It seems like we're putting in historically where we basically have broken through a lot of those real supports we wanted to hold when this thing was listed, and now we have so much resistance ahead of us or above us if we were ever going to find a bounce. There's no differentiation currently in this coin in terms of what's happening other than a continued bleed out, and the fact that the RSI is still over 30. I almost feel it, if it can't hold this area, it could suggest really going down further. If we could kind of do a bunch of sideways price action, at least over the next several days, potentially find a better support here, I'd much feel better with this stochastic staying up here, the RSI trying to retest some previous resistance areas. But a break of 30 on the RSI would signal a continuation of the downfall. It's hard. I kind of feel like we're clutching at straws on this one, trying to find some more bullishness other than the fact that it's oversold a little bit, but really not, and it could definitely fall lower.
Yeah, there's nothing. If I was trying to if I wasn't in this, there's no reason for me to get interested in this.
Yeah.
So let's just kind of work through these. We have some great questions here. I am Big Cheds. That's Big Chonis. Would love to hear how you identify support and resistance levels by Justin Knapwood. Support and resistance. So I'm a candlestick trader. So support and resistance. I'll try to find something that's a little more pertinent. Let's do like the Bitcoin daily chart just to kind of all be on the same page here. I'll remove all that fancy stuff. So here's what you're looking for. You want to be looking for a logical resistance. So you want to be looking for an area where volume has been transacted in the past. So if you find your bottom here, Big Chonis, at 5,800 and you're rising, and you're in if you believe you're in an uptrend, what you're looking for is areas of prior traffic. So if you look at what happened here after this bounce at 5,800, it took 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, a bunch of days to break through this area here from June 10th to June 20th. Right, so this area here, right, that was an area of logical resistance. As you were rising, you have to work through it. As you're coming back up again, okay, this right here, you had to consolidate quite a bit to work through this area right over here. All right, so between that, pardon me for that. So basically between that, you had to work on this area, right? So basically you're looking to see where the volume was transacted in the past, and old support. When you break the support, it becomes resistance, and vice versa. So right now, when we're falling, okay, you want to see where was volume in the past. transacted. This was an area of heavy traffic. There's a lot of days where buyers and sellers were negotiating their price, and it stands to reason that people own Bitcoin at this price level and perhaps would be willing to defend it. And that's kind of how support works. So that's kind of what my thoughts are. What are your thoughts, Big Chonis?
Yeah, Cheds. I mean, there's so many indicators that we can use in charting to assess, where areas of support and where areas of resistance can be. So, adding to what you said about basically support areas in terms of previous price action, areas where there was a lot of volume, areas where there was previous dollar amount support. Other than that, things we like to use is the Bollinger Bands to find areas of support or resistance, especially the middle BB. Many times acts as a great indicator of a support and a hold. Above it basically can show there's still bullish intentions. A failure to hold of that middle BB, like we can see here in Bitcoin, that signal of a support zone, not a price zone, but actually a line of the Bollinger on the daily. Once that broke, that can be an indicator that says, hey, if the middle can't hold, then I know we're heading down to test the lower BB. Other things I like to use are Fibonacci lines based on retraces of moves on the up and on the down. Even trying to figure out Elliott waves and trying to understand basically if you can think of which wave we're in, and maybe are we in the end of 5 or the beginning of 4. Those are all other things that traders can use other than just old price support and resistance levels to determine that. And the last thing I want to say about this is your MAs and your EMAs are basically an average of the price action, okay? And they're basically continuously shown to be affecting the price either as support and resistance zone, especially when EMAs cross over. If a lower term time frame
right
goes,
here.
yep, exactly. So we're looking at somewhat of a bear cross there that can play out, and that's putting that extra downward pressure on the price.
It's a great call. So next question from Trade or Die. Would appreciate your would appreciate your analysis of long-term BTC projections. And if you can take a look at 2014 to 2016 trend. And projections are, I think, in my opinion, are useless. So that's what I'm gonna say about projections. I like to watch this candle and then the next candle. I stay in the moment. It's too hard to project out because you don't know what's going to happen next week. I mean, if the ETF is approved, versus not approved, that's a whole different paradigm. So I think it's weird to project out. What are your thoughts on projections? And then we'll go ahead and look at that 2014 to 16 trend.
Sure. Well, I think predictions are regarded to time, and time is all relative. So I can give you my thoughts on where I think Bitcoin could possibly be in 2020 or 2022. But I think what the question really is trying to get to is really how low can we go in this corrective move of our parabolic move that brought us to almost $20,000? And the answer I have for that question is a lot lower. Cheds and I have traded stocks over the years, some more risky than others, and we've seen examples of these parabolic moves where in a very short amount of time frame, relatively speaking, you have a massive bullish move that the price of that asset rises not just hundreds of percent, but thousands of percent in a relatively short amount of time. And every example that we have seen of that to play out, we have seen a complete unwinding of that price action to close to back to almost where it started in the first place. Now, obviously, I'm not really trying to compare stocks and those, and especially the OTC penny stocks with Bitcoin, because there's very much that is different about them. The main thing is dilution and creating more shares that dilute the price. Bitcoin is capped; it's finite. It will only be 21 million out there. There's currently a little over 17 million mined currently. So, in my experience, we've seen whenever we have a parabolic move, which this clearly is, the unwinding of this will take you back to areas that you wouldn't be surprised at. But we see most of the money, most of our price action is down sub 5,000 and maybe even sub 4,000.
So what do you think? I've got at the right, I've got 2014 to the 16 move, and I've got our current move.
So the 14 move, basically, it had a couple things about it that are very similar to what we're seeing, and there's a couple things that are slightly different. The one major thing I see is the time. I almost feel like we're moving at a faster pace in terms of our correction than the 2014 fractal. There are lots of examples in the 2014 fractal somewhere in this area, potentially, where we have had a quick spike up in the price, and then only to just give it all back very quickly and then some. And kind of, I feel like we're experiencing one of those moments here where we have a really quick spike in the price and then a shock to the market where it takes 2 weeks to go up $2,000 and it takes 2 weeks to come back down $2,000. The bottom line is there's a point in the 2014 fractal where we basically capitulate, get to a low area, and for a very long extended time are in a very tight trading zone, which would probably put Bitcoin somewhere around $2,500 to $3,500 maybe for a very long time, where there could be one more really nasty dip in the price action, some FUD news that could potentially create that V bottom bounce that could initiate our next bull market. And it's hard to say. The last one took 2.5 years, okay, of being mired in a bearish market till we were able to break through our all-time high of 1,000 again and start our trek to 20,000. So for this to really play out, we have to take it one step at a time, and unfortunately the market might have to capitulate much lower for us to reset and create our next bull market.
That's a great analysis. I think you certainly may be right. I just feel like history rhymes; it doesn't repeat. So we'll see. I mean, it's a new. I just think maybe it's a new paradigm. I think it's yet to be seen if we continue to break support. But I think it's healthy if we did find a base here around 4,500 or even 5,500 and just go sideways for a while. I mean, that's what you want to do. And clearly in the weekly chart, you have declining volume here, which would kind of suggest that you're kind of heading towards a pivot. I mean, you're kind of halfway through consolidation or 2/3. You can kind of see it. See what I'm saying? Right? The volume's trailing down. Once the volume gets low, right, you can kind of probably maybe something will happen. So
I do see that, and I agree. The problem is I feel a lot of the money, a lot of the price action on Bitcoin basically above like 9,000, like 10,000. It's almost kind of meaningless. Like there was so, in the big scheme of things, there's so little from a time perspective, even though there was crazy amounts of money up there.
Not that much.
Not that much, but there was just a lot of that price action, almost kind of unfortunately for this time being, has to be forgotten. I think the market is going to focus on those much lower areas where your VPVR clearly shows most of the money history clearly lies in Bitcoin.
You got it. Next question from James Elieni. Hey, Cheds and Chonis. I'm interested to know whether either of you use an algorithm or rule-based trading system when you trade Bitcoin. Algorithms. I can see you both use various technical indicators. My question is, just as Peter Brand has his system, essentially, are the rules which are sufficient for you? So I'll kind of just speak for myself. I don't really have an algorithm. I like to kind of feel it out. I'm at the point where I look at a chart and I kind of have a good feeling initially if it's bullish or it's bearish. So if I like the chart, if I think it's going in the right direction, then I'll look at the indicators and I'll look for divergence. I'll look for a particular pattern to form. I'll look for a candlestick pattern, or I'll use Western technicals with a trend line. I'll see if there's a trend line break or retest. So I'll kind of look for signals. I'll also monitor social media. I'll kind of see what's going on and try to get a sense of what the market is doing. What are your thoughts on that subject?
Yeah, I mean, it's a valid question because computers are really taking over a lot of the trades. And if you're an algorithmic trader, if you're one of those basically who pre-programmed some sort of a situation of an if this happens, then I will do this. If this indicator crosses bearish, then I will sell or do a short. And if this crosses bullish, then I will do a long. And, a lot of people are trying to trade on that kind of a situation. And with the overall stock market, there's some validity to that. You clearly see now that Bitcoin's price action right now, unlike a stock, is not driven by more or less fundamentals or profits in a quarter or stock buybacks. It's really driven by faith in the market, what the market feels the actual fair value price is. So because of that volatility, that is very different from an actual stock, in terms of relatively speaking, at least. Um, you have to adapt. You have to always adapt. So I am now changing up some of my interests and some of my, I guess, speculation or expectations of Bitcoin right now because of the news we had, because of this ETF news, and more importantly because how the price action reacted to it. So as a trader, as an investor, especially in crypto, you always have to constantly adapt to the market because the market is constantly changing exponentially. Okay, so you can't just assume that things are playing out as planned, because every day there could be some sort of a screwball that kind of just happens, and it could be something from overseas. It could be a Bitcoin-based situation, a hack or exchange fails. These are all things that as a trader you have to keep in mind, and that's why as a safe person, having a stop loss in play as a trader always very important.
Excellent. Next question. We have a few more here, and we can do a couple requests. Also from Jonathan James. I'd be interested for each of you to give an example of how you approach and enter a trade. Do you enter incrementally? Yeah, I mean, this is a question about scaling in, and yes. So essentially, I think what I like to do is I like to kind of break up my entry into about 3 or 4 pieces. Now, with a lot of these patterns, the best entry comes. So say you have like a morning star. I'm going to pull this up for you. I'm going to kind of make a quick point, and then I'll pass it off to you, and you kind of walk us through your thoughts. So here's a morning star. So say the morning star completes, Big Chonis, and you decide to buy on the completion of the 3rd candle. What happens if the next candle, right? You retrace like maybe half of that candle body, or maybe even down to the low, which is likely support. Maybe it doesn't come for another few days or a few candles. Pardon me. So if you have a strategy where maybe your first entry's here, and then you plan on scaling back in at support, right? At logical support. So you definitely do want to scale in. You do want to see how the market reacts. And you want to scale out as well, taking profit. I think at major resistance points, definitely lowering your cost average when you do that, and potentially getting to the point where you're riding free. Do you have any quick thoughts on that subject, scaling in, scaling out, Big Chonis?
Yeah, I mean, there's kind of 2 ways to look at it. If you're waiting for an entry point, you're watching the chart methodically, you've been watching it for a while, you've been studying it, and you're sure that this is an area you want to start to take a position, I totally agree. Scaling in is by far the way to go. You also have to factor in what your trading exchanges fees are, because there are ways to basically enter a trade with a 0 fee, which can really, over the long term, save you a lot of money. There are times, though, where I would suggest more of a maybe more of aggressive entry or exit, and these are very volatile moments in price action, when you're either trying to catch a knife, if you will, or sell into a rocket on the way up there. So most of the time, you want to be methodical and play a trade out and expect to level in at certain places. You're never going to hit the nut low. You're just never going to do it. So it's okay to enter in slowly, but every trade you enter in, as the price drops, you should incrementally be increasing what your buy is, okay? So at a point where you do find a bottom in your trade and starts to rise higher, your actual dollar cost entry is at a very it allows you more flexibility in your trade, because you were smart to kind of slowly add on the way down, but your higher entries are lower. So it would not take much of a pop to basically bring you back to even, and then choose how much risk you want to take in the trade.
Beautiful, beautiful analysis. Next, we have a few more questions. So Cheds, he's asking only me this question. So sorry. No. Hey, Ched, can you please tell us how you use Bollinger Bands, RSI, and OBV? 3 questions. We kind of do different things. I'll just briefly discuss those 3, and maybe you can give us your thoughts. Bollinger Bands, I like to use as an overbought or oversold indicator, similar to perhaps to RSI. So, when the price historically dips below the lower Bollinger Band, that's usually that's essentially a price movement outside of a standard deviation. So usually that's a favorable setup. But in a kind of, when you have this much selling pressure, that breaks that rule. Sometimes let me show you an example before I babble on here too much. Let's go to Ethereum Classic. Let's go to the 4-hour last night. And you see how when the price was surged above the upper Bollinger Band, pardon me, it had to pull back. Sorry about that. So yeah, so we had a price movement. So when it's above the upper Bollinger Band, basically it's overbought. When it's below, it's oversold. The middle Bollinger Band, which is the 20-period moving average, that can be support as well, as can the upper and lower bands. And oftentimes when the Bollinger Bands pinch, they get really tight after a period of sideways movement, you're going to see a move up or down. That's called a Bollinger Band pinch. RSI overbought, oversold, above 70, below 30. You can also look for trends in the RSI and look to see when those trends are broken. You can look for patterns, head and shoulders sometimes. You look for support as well. This is finding support potentially here on the RSI in this area. And the on-balance volume, I use that as a kind of an accumulation distribution indicator. It's a sentiment indicator. It shows me how healthy it is. So, for example, I was just about to tweet this later. I'm looking at the 15-minute Bitcoin chart, Big Chonis, and you see how we have bullish divergence on stock RSI and on the RSI, but not on the on-balance volume. We have higher lows. We have higher lows on the stochastics RSI, higher lows on the RSI, but not in the price, and the on-balance volume doesn't have it yet. For me, divergence is much stronger when it comes from the on-balance volume. So I don't use on-balance for overbought or oversold. I use it for trends. Like this is a clear trend line right now, right? I could just go, boom, clear trend line right there. If that breaks, that'd be a signal. If this starts to put in higher lows versus the price, that would get my attention. That's kind of just a basic primer, if you will, on those, how I use those 3. What are your thoughts in that?
Yeah, I mean, these are all really important indicators to get a sense of, the price action, where the market could be. I agree with you on the Bollinger Bands. I think the higher the time frame, you want to add more importance, more legitimacy to that particular move. So, if you're outside the BB on a 4-hour or on a much lower time frame, yeah, it's kind of oversold or overbought. But if you go out much wider, like a daily or a 4-hour or even a weekly, and then you're outside the Bollinger Band, either on the up or on the down, then that much more exacerbates the level of outside the standard deviation you truly are. And that's a great indicator that either you're way too overbought or way too oversold. And I agree with you in terms of the RSI, and the divergence, the bearish divergence in the OBV is notable there. This was
it's the lack of bullish divergence. There's no bearish divergence.
Right. The lack of bullish divergence, yes.
Right, as compared to the other oscillators. Yep.
Definitely notable.
We have 3 more questions. We've already answered. Okay, what are your thoughts on alts versus BTC in the upcoming bull market? I think we kind of answered this question about how to trade alts and what we think about the market. Thank you so much for the Q&A. Comment on altcoins. What signs would you look out for to catch the next bull run in alts? In my opinion, potentially, coin market, we potentially see BTC dominance around 50%, Big Chonis.
And we didn't get there. We're just right there. We still haven't touched it yet. And, our market cap, we peaked out at right around 300 billion 2 weeks ago, which has proven to be very strong resistance dollar amount in terms of Bitcoin. So now we broke 250 as well. We're under 250. It's arguably to assume that potentially 200 billion overall market cap could be the next place to go. I do expect Bitcoin dominance to increase as the alts continue to bleed out and kind of fall by the wayside. Unfortunately, a lot of them will.
Okay. Let's see. Let's take a look. So that's a great, you essentially answered all of Gary's questions there. This is a great question. And the last one, and we'll do a couple, there's one or two requests in the chat room. And I appreciate you guys joining us. Just as a reminder, we've been talking with Big Chonis on Twitter at Big Chonis, and myself on Twitter at Big Cheds, the guy with the big cheese hat. Basically, it's a question about time frames, Big Chonis. Basically, what time frame do you use with your favorite indicator? So I don't have an indicator for time frame, my friend, Crypto Owl. Pardon me. It's really what I'm looking to do. I know, Big Chonis, you're going to talk about 15-minute and 5-minute, hour. You tend to look at a lot lower time frames than I do. I like to really look at 4-hour and up because I'm looking for a broader movement. And I really use my indicators on essentially anything I'm looking at, except the stochastics are an RSI on a 15-minute chart. Maybe too much whiplash for me, moving up and down. But other than that, I pretty much use all my indicators on all time frames. What about you, good buddy?
Yeah, I agree. It's very important as a trader to have a sense of all time frames, from the 5-minute all the way up to the weekly. And then in between that, not just the daily, but the 2-day and the 3-day, you can get candle pattern analysis on those days as well. So if I'm scalping, if I'm day trading, if I'm trying to, scalp a few percent here or there, I'm on a much lower time frame, looking for oversold RSI, looking for a stochastics reset on like a 5, a 15, maybe up to a 30-minute. And if I'm trading like that, I keep a lower time frame. But if I'm trading in that area, it's because I've used the analysis of higher time frames to determine that's where I want to start to place a bet.
I love it. We have one request in the chat room. And if anyone else is watching, this is your chance. Forever now or hold your peace. DGB from AT in the chat room. DGB and DGB currently at 460 Satoshis. So I'll just go, let's go daily chart, right? Because we just closed the daily candle. So, pardon me. Yeah, it still looks pretty weak. It looks weak, like short term for me, Big Chonis. But we're actually in an uptrend, essentially, from this point, and we're still, depends on where you start. But we have higher lows now, and we have higher highs. So we're kind of waiting. You see how the exponential average has already crossed over. We're waiting for it to curl back up. That's going to take some time. That's going to take another week or two. We do have declining volume. Stochastics is hinting at coming back down. RSI is kind of just hanging out there. On balance volume is kind of just hanging out there. I think we could see this 385. I think we could potentially see this, in my view, go to 400, 385 to 400. And then potentially that would be your new higher low, and then maybe come back up. So I would think short-term bearish, but medium-term bullish. What's your view?
Yeah, Cheds, I mean, you're right in an area here where if you're a bull, you really want to hold. You're right in an area where it was very strong previous price history. The BPDR clearly shows that this area, the mid 400s Satoshi is a very strong area. And as a bull, you want to hold here. Now, we've retraced about 61.8% on this pullback. So we're in a zone here where you would expect some support. And if this was going to make our next bullish leg higher, like right here is the time to do it. So if you want to take a long on this, this is right at the area from a bullish scenario that you want to play out to happen. But keep a tight stop loss, because if we're unable to hold this area here.
What's this area though? What do you mean? What do you mean this area? Like, what does that mean?
I'm saying I would give it to as low as like 425 maybe. If we're breaking through 425,
right,
then I think we're going back to 300, and there's just no
300. Why?
Yeah, because there's just no follow through in this. If this area of
300.
Level,
Oh, right here, right here.
You think we kind of
Yeah.
And that's the reason. If we don't hold here, there's nothing between, I feel, this area and that
But doesn't
area.
it? Yeah, but doesn't anything? Doesn't the fact we put in a higher high here count for anything? Wouldn't that suggest a little nod to the Bulls that they
Only if we can put in a higher low. I think a retest
That's what I'm saying.
of that area is a
Yeah.
failure. I think it's a failure.
Yeah.
And I think for that reason alone, any
Mm-hmm.
kind of a dead cat bounce would be just that, a dead cat bounce. So this is it. This is the area for bullish continuation. I kind of like where the stochastics is. The RSI could be better, but the OBV is strong. The OBV,
it could be better,
technically speaking, but the OBV seems to be holding up decently. And again, as long as we can hold this area, the chart does remain in play and bullish.
Well, I want to thank everybody for joining us tonight. It was a real treat. I want to thank you especially, Big Chonis, for lending your time. I know you're a busy man, and you're working on several projects. I know I personally do enjoy those video updates you put out, and your work ethic is putting me to shame. So good job. Keep it up.
Thanks, man.
Find him on Twitter at Big Chonis. Find me on Twitter at Big Cheds. Any closing thoughts before we say goodbye?
Yeah, guys, listen, I mean, I'm in crypto for the long haul. You guys should be too. And if you want to, you got to be smart with your cash and with your investments. Play this game for the long term because there's great opportunity in crypto. It's here to stay. And if you continue to listen to people that know their TA and know what they're talking about and can provide you with some of the guidance that as a trader you really need, you know, we're all trying to figure this out together. I'm a big fan of sharing ideas and having an open discussion. And I think we just showed an example of how open discussion can kind of plan out some thoughts and play out some ideas. And the more we can continue to do that as traders, as investors, and as players in this market, the more prosperous we can become.
I love it. I love it. Once again, that's Big Chonis. I'm Big Cheds. I want to thank you for being members in Bitcoin Live. This is all only possible because of you. We appreciate your continued feedback and growing with us. I think we're at the ground floor here. And I just want to wish you all a wonderful evening. Take care.